Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Human School, where we want to share a little bit about our growth and processes behind the scenes, as well as what we're curious about this week. So our Inside the Human School question this week is, how has the human school iterated or changed, and what iterations are you looking forward to? So one of the things for me that has been interesting is the way that we understand some of our own mind shifts. While on paper, maybe some of them haven't changed, there have been some really interesting conversations, especially around the curator compass point and what everybody's understanding of that is. And there have been some great kind of aha moments behind the scenes of what it means to curate. And that it's not just information, but that it's, various perspectives on a situation. So that has been really interesting to hear. And especially because for me, it was very different than maybe it was intended. So that, and then in terms of what I'm looking forward to, I love the idea of the spaces where there are missing elements that, whether it's a compass point or whether it's a mind shift, that there are more components to this in the way that we make change and the way that we push back against a system and help to alter it. So I enjoy the conversations that we're having as we try to kind of circle what are those mind shifts that maybe we don't have, but that exist. And as we talk to people who are doing some of this work in schools, what is part of their process that we maybe didn't have in our first ish iteration.
Yeah, and I think that's been really our intention from the beginning. Is this an idea? It needs to evolve. And I would say one of the areas that has shifted a bit has been audience. That I think initially the audience was sort of like, let's just cast the net wide and like people will think it's a neat idea. Well, I think it actually is kind of a bit niche of an idea. And I think that in order to engage, one has to sort of already be doing this kind of work, or at least be interested in the idea that if we want to transform schools, we have to think differently. So I think narrowing the audience down to a particular niche of folks that are doing the work, and we'll see how that grows over the next year again or so. But after 3 months, I think that's one of the areas that is most noticeable to me.
I think for me, the one that stands out is thinking a lot about as Rachel alluded to, the curator compass point, and particularly the role of being an insider and valuing the insider perspective. And I think that this is an interesting conversation given where we're at as a country in thinking about the role of experts and expertise, and how we as educators have a lay of the context. And so like this is the one that I grapple with. Many of the other ones I feel like I have a decent understanding of and could explain. This is one that I still, as I think about iteration and grow my own thinking, is one that I continue to come back to. And one of the things I wanted to share, just to kind of make the connection to the second part of our conversation this week about, what we've been reflecting on. I've been listening to 2 more episodes of Michael Lewis's podcast, Against the Rules, in which he talks about experts and expertise. This idea that people consistently use like one example, they have their own personal experience as being the thing that guides their deterministic way of thinking about the world. And so it's not just that we are our own experts, but that are we willing to put aside our own personal experiences? So, you have one bad experience with a student in a classroom or one bad experience with someone, and now your whole perspective on things is based on that one experience. At the same time, I struggle with the idea that we should only use data or evidence over time and ignore the experience part of it. And so it's just this really interesting constant, like we've talked about how the compass points and the mind shifts are continuums. And this is one where I can't place myself on that continuum at all. I don't know what I believe as it relates to that. I think it's true, but I struggle with where I fall within that.
Yeah, that's mine too, that I've been thinking a lot about this week, because we talked about stories the other day, and one of the things that I didn't say in the conversation because it feels so complicated for me is just what you said around data, right? Like we talk about COVID, right? That there are people who have anecdotal experiences, stories that stand for the whole of their experience. And yet they're met with data as a response. But that's not everybody. That's not everybody, right? But then simultaneously, we drown out the stories with data. But so something like in education, right? We look at underperforming schools, the data says this, and then we completely eliminate all of the stories of amazing things that are happening there. But that simultaneously, on the other side, when you look at the pandemic situation, the story and the experience becomes the thing that we want to shout down because the data says da 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 da. So that's exactly where I get stuck too. Like, I know that the answer is that it's both. It's not either or. It's some combination of both, depending on context. We know those things, but that's the place that I tend to get kind of stuck, because I do think there are places that the data is really important, and that it needs to be more than just a story. And then I think there are places where the data is made way too important and it drowns out the stories that are really important. So yeah, that's my struggle this week too.
I think another way that we've iterated, sorry, Randy, I didn't mean to cut you off there, is just in the way that we've thought about, early on, we knew that we wanted to have some examples of the conversations that we were having. And then we've become a little bit more intentional about inviting others, which I think we've always been a part of our design. But that's an example of an iteration, is that, we wanted to get our footing underneath ourselves and find out whether these conversations felt like the right conversations to be happening in their structures. And so I think an iteration that you'll start to see more and more of over the coming, months and through the remainder of the year is more intentional invitation for others to participate, so that we can learn from more than just the, one another.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think diving deeper into that mind shift is probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but that's definitely something for a future week we should talk about. Mm-hmm. I've got some ideas.
Okay. I'm excited to
we
hear
could
them.
Iterate based on those ideas.
We could.
Yeah. All right. Well, we wanted to thank you so much for learning inside us in this edition of The Human School. And we would love to hear more about how you're placing humanity at the center of all design. If you join us on our Facebook community, you can share some of those insights. Or if you want to read more, head to our website and to our conversations page, where you can hear all sorts of things from us, from blogs to videos to podcasts. Have a great rest of your day, guys.
Bye, guys.